Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk. No guest on today's Plain Talk. It's just going to be Chad and I talking to North Dakota men who are not out deer hunting this morning. I'm wondering how many people are going to be listening to this podcast as they're driving around in their pickups on their phone looking for deer. I don't know, but I've been getting texts. In fact, some people I tried to book last minute on the show. I won't mention them, but sending pictures of myself back, like sending pictures of themselves back, like, no, I'm out at the deer hunting camp. I'm out at my relative's farm. We're going deer hunting. So,
yeah, Port, why aren't you a North Dakotan? What's wrong with you?
Because I'm an Alaskan, and I actually have a funny story about this. I grew up, like, my dad and his brothers were big hunters in Alaska, and I've hunted. Like, I've shot moose, I've shot bear, I've shot caribou. It feels deeply uncomfortable for Alaskans to hunt in North Dakota. This idea of being on someone else's land all the time, left. I mean, I can remember sitting with my dad, like, looking at the maps and, like, trying to figure out, where can we hunt again? What is this stuff? In Alaska, like, the deep freeze would start getting empty, and so one of my dad or his brothers would go knock down a moose, right? I mean, we went down to Cars, the local grocery store, and just bought a permit, and then went and shot a moose. We used to have a fish wheel on the Copper River that would just scoop salmon out of the water, and then we would clean the salmon. We ate so much salmon when I was a kid. I can't even look at a salmon today.
Salmon's like the one food I don't like, but it's not because I ate too much of it as a young man.
It is big for me. We had salmon patties for breakfast and grilled salmon for dinner, and people are like, "Oh, that's so great!" Well, eat it every meal. Not as great. That was like a chore. Like, we had to come home and, like, clean salmon after school.
How many people do you think we've lost already looking for politics?
Quite a few. All right, so we're going to get into the politics and not talk about my what do you call them? My heyday cleaning salmon as a kid. We are going to talk about a poll that was just out. Now, this is part of the North Dakota poll. We had on Brian Lundy, who is a longtime, what do you want to call him, political strategist, but he's helping the North Dakota News Cooperative, and they have a bunch of other partners. My employers at the forum are partners in this. I think the North Dakota Petroleum Council is a partner in this. So it's a lot of sort of public interest type groups that are coming together, and I think, they pay money and then they can fund and have questions included on the survey. And so the first one out of the gate is a presidential preference question. And it was reported, my colleague Patrick Springer has the report in the forum, and Doug Burgum came in third place. And Chad, the first question I guess we could ask is, are you surprised by this? Which is like the pundit, sort of cliche question. Am I surprised? Am I not surprised? How much time are we going to spend about how surprised everybody was? And nobody likes to say they were surprised, because that means, I didn't know what I was talking about. So I'm going to actually admit that. I was surprised that Doug Burgum took third place in this. I didn't expect him to win this poll. I always expected Donald Trump to win this poll. He did win this poll among Republican voters, which is obviously who we want to measure in a Republican primary. He's at 54%. Even among all voters, he's got a very large plurality at 38%. Second place came in Joe Biden at 19%. But Doug Burgum didn't even take second. He was behind Ron DeSantis. DeSantis at 14%, Burgum at 12%, Nikki Haley at 10%. So those three all crowded. I mean, you could almost say they all kind of tied maybe for second place. But I was surprised. I expected Doug to maybe be like 20, 25%, somewhere in there, and he fell short.
So, Rob, not to be that guy, but no, I was not surprised by it. But I have an advantage. I've seen some polling over the last 3 or 4 months that asked this question, as part of like polling on other things with this. And it lines up with other polling I've seen. But I also say sort of yawn, I'm not surprised, because have you looked at the South Carolina polling where Tim Scott and Nikki Haley are getting demolished? Where have you looked at Florida polling where DeSantis is getting demolished? I mean, Burgum's not like in a club all by himself where he's losing his home state. It is interesting to think that more people in North Dakota want first choice Joe Biden to be president, first choice Doug Burgum to be president.
That was really interesting. So you're talking, if you look at the all voters category, Donald Trump at 30, is it 38 or 36? I can't read. I think it's 38. 38%, Joe Biden at 19%, then Doug Burgum at 11%. That's among all voters. So I guess if we're talking about wounds to Doug Burgum's ego, that's probably the worst one than the presidential preference among Republicans.
Well, and I think the other thing, looking at second place, third place, fourth place, I mean, in terms of a plus or minus in a poll, I mean, there's no difference between those three. They're essentially tied, right?
Sure,
I mean, it's 2 points difference between them. But, I think that, your column this morning was spot on if you want to talk about that. But, I mean, it's something that I've been thinking about, just wait until I have 100% name ID. Well, you have 100% name ID in North Dakota, and you're still at 12%.
Yeah, that was my column. The headline was name recognition clearly isn't the problem with Doug Burgum's presidential campaign, because he said that a lot. He said, I don't have name ID. People in Iowa and New Hampshire don't know me very well. People across the nation don't know me very well. Okay, well, this poll's in North Dakota. This poll is where you were born. This poll is where you started your business and made your fortune, right? Where you quote unquote literally sold the farm, as you tell us all the time. This is the place where you were elected governor in 2016 with over 70% of the vote. It's where you were reelected in 2020 with, well over 60% of the vote. So, I mean, your name recognition is better in North Dakota than it is anywhere else in the world. And you took third place. Or I guess, again, if we want to say effectively tied for second with two other candidates, but
that's not fun to say everybody's tied for second, right? That's not the way we do things. But it's also part of it is a bit of a yawn, because you and I have been talking about this from the beginning, that there's one person who has a stranglehold on the primary voters in the Republican Party. It doesn't matter if it's a poll in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Florida, or North Dakota. Donald Trump is the person that the Republican Party really, really wants to be their nominee for president. So I don't know if this says as much about Doug Burgum as it does it does to a certain extent. There was never, looking at the numbers right now, there was never a path for anybody not named Donald Trump to get this nomination.
Yeah, I think something would have to happen.
But what?
Well, like he literally gets put in jail, or some of these lawsuits about the 14th Amendment, and he gets disqualified in some of these states, which by the way, I don't support those. I don't know. Donald Trump hasn't been convicted of anything, and I have a really hard time barring somebody from the ballot without that due process. I know some very smart people disagree with me on that. I have a tough time with the idea.
But even if
as much as I loathe Donald Trump, I have a problem.
And we've talked about this since Governor Burgum got in the race. The other problem that Governor Burgum has had is, okay, let's say something happens with Trump. Let's say he goes to jail, whatever. Doug Burgum isn't, even if he popped, even if all this money that he spent got him the name ID and he ended up at 10, 12% in polls, he vetoed a voucher bill. He vetoed a mask bill. He vetoed a trans athlete bill.
I don't see
that's tough in the primary to get folks who number one choice is Donald Trump to then jump to Doug Burgum. He's too normal. He's too rational.
So the things are saying, Donald Trump's making his own gravity in American politics. And it's really interesting. I actually have another column, I think it'll go up today, about how the Moms for Liberty kind of nationally got a shellacking. They got drubbed. And I kind of pointing that, hey, maybe Williston, North Dakota was a bellwether for what was going to happen nationally. Because you're talking about back in August, there was a recall election in Williston, and it was that same dynamic where you had Moms for Liberty, you had a very North Dakota specific group called the Sons for Liberty that are in that same sort of political, what do you want to call it, category. And they were backing a recall election. They were backing a bunch of school board candidates who were all about the culture war issues, banned books, et cetera, and they lost in Williston, North Dakota, which is one of the bloodiest red places in a bloody red state, and they lost. And so I think you can say that Donald Trump is a singular figure in American politics right now. A lot of the stuff that he does, even other candidates who are trying to emulate him, who are trying to be Trump, can't pull it off because they're not Trump. I mean, Ron DeSantis, I think, being one of the figures. I mean, what is Ron DeSantis if not, I'm Trump without the baggage? I'm Trump, but more effective. Even it doesn't work because he's not Trump.
And people like me who, I mean, at this point in the game, I want Joe Biden to be reelected president. People like DeSantis have scared me because it is, okay, he has all the same positions as Donald Trump, but without the craziness. I mean, right? I mean, so isn't it going to be really hard for Joe Biden to beat DeSantis? But then you look at the head-to-head polls, it doesn't matter who the Republicans nominate. The numbers are sort of the same. I think that's the other place, Rob, where you could see if there was like a huge difference between the other candidates and Trump versus Biden, like if Trump fell way down, then maybe there'd be a case for these other candidates to say, listen, we can't lose this thing. But Donald Trump is going to lose. But when these polls come out that show Trump is beating Biden
in battleground states,
it's real hard to make
because that's one of the arguments you could make is what's the point of endorsing Trump, nominating Trump if he can't win? Well, the electability argument's kind of out the window right now based on the polling. Now there is still. People say, well, Ben Carson, was leading at this point in Iowa. I mean, people can make that argument. Like, nothing really counts until the voters actually count. There's one poll that matters, and that's the poll we take on Election Day when the voters go to the ballot box. So whether we're talking about the caucuses or the primaries or the actual election. So, I mean, maybe something's going to happen when the states start to vote, and maybe Trump fades. And then maybe something snowballs. But even in that scenario, if we get back to talking about Doug Burgum, if all of a sudden Donald Trump's not looking like the one anymore and something has shattered this mystique around him and his voters are looking for somewhere to go, I don't see like hardcore, like I'm with Trump despite the criminal indictments, despite the paid off porn stars, despite the business fraud, despite January 6th, despite all those other things, I'm with Trump. If suddenly Trump's not an option anymore, I don't see those people lining up for Doug Burgum. I see them maybe lining up for Ron DeSantis. I see them lining up maybe for like a Vivek Ramaswamy. I don't even think Nikki Haley pulls a lot of those voters in.
Or Tim Scott, for that matter.
Or Tim Scott. Tim Scott's basically a non-entity at this point.
Right.
I think he's a very nice man. I think he's a fine senator. He just doesn't have what it takes to run a national campaign.
Well, and the other thing, if you're Doug Burgum, so you had Governor Kim Reynolds endorse DeSantis in Iowa this past week. And then you had Governor Sununu in New Hampshire, who has by and large been a promoter of Doug Burgum. They're friendly. He likes him, whatever. And Sununu basically said, hey, if you didn't make the debate stage, you need to get out of the race. I mean, there was some talk that he might endorse Burgum at some point.
Yeah.
And now he's saying if you're not on the debate stage, you can get out. And I had to laugh a little bit at the beginning of this week, and you wrote a column about it. The Burgum camp saying he was, quote, skipping the debate.
Yeah.
It's like you're not invited to a party, and then you're telling people that you're skipping it. Or like I said to you, it's like the Dodgers and the Yankees saying, we decided to skip the World Series this year.
Yeah, that's what we decided. That's what we decided as a team is the Yankees fans all got together and said, you know what? We've won more World Series than any other team. Let's give some other people a shot at it.
Let's give the Rangers a shot at
this.
Let's
give the Rangers a shot at it so they could embarrass us by taking the picture that we cast off for anyway, I'm not going to get into it. We don't need to go down that rabbit hole. I think you're right. I just don't. Like Governor Sununu. I think if Doug Burgum had given something that somebody like Governor Sununu could wrap their arms around, but what has he done? Like he made the debate stages, but it was kind of gimmicky because he got the donors with the cash card thing.
And the second one, a poll at the last second.
Like at the last second, he barely got in. But he's been stagnant. Like his polls, I check his polling numbers every single day. Like I'm charting them, right? Because I'm looking, like trying. I'm like a doctor trying to find a heartbeat. I need to see something. And I don't know where it is. And I'm saying that as somebody, I want to find that. I want to believe that a candidate like Doug Burgum could catch fire in the Republican primary. You don't know how bad I want that. I want Nikki Haley to she kind of has a little bit, although we're all kidding ourselves, like she's surged to the front of the also-rans.
Yeah, she surged to the front to be down by 40 points.
Right. She's well positioned to move if something happens to Trump. But if nothing happens to Trump, if things continue as they are, he's the nominee.
Right.
And I just don't see anything changing that, which is really, really frustrating.
And I keep thinking about the Burgum campaign meetings. And I mean, it's millions and millions of dollars. And I think what people have to understand is often like media consultants are paid based on a percentage of the total buy, up to 15%. So every time Doug Burgum puts another $1 million on TV, there's some consultant taking a percentage of that as their fee going forward. I was once involved in a campaign where the candidate was just stuck. Month after month after month, he was at 45%, couldn't move the numbers. And he had the chairman of his campaign tell him, sometimes the dogs just won't eat the dog food. No matter how you dress it up, what ads you run or whatever, you're not going to get over 45%. That's the reality here. Who's in the room with Doug Burgum looking at the polls and saying, the dogs aren't eating the dog food. No matter what you do, no matter what magical ad you run next, the numbers aren't moving at this point. And I fear that there's a lot of people buying beach houses from consulting on the Burgum campaign right now. And they're encouraging him to stay in as long as possible.
It does make me wonder. Like, I don't think it's a situation where Doug Burgum's being led around by the nose. He's just not that kind of person. He's not a naive person. He's not a stupid person. I think it's more Doug Burgum really, really, really wants this, and he's not surrounded by a lot of people who are bringing him back to reality. And
I'm not suggesting that Doug Burgum's being led around, but I think you're absolutely right. When you really, really want something and you want to see the path, and you're surrounded by people who show you the path, even though it's not realistic.
And people who stand to make a lot of money if you stay on the path. And neither of us are privy to what those conversations.
Nope.
So I don't know. But I will say, when I saw that tweet, I mean, my response was how much I respect Doug Burgum. I don't want to believe that he's that delusional, where he's going to tell us he chose to skip the debate. And that's what I'm worried about is, I think there's a lot of people who are happy to see him run. For being a North Dakotan, it's a nice feeling. We love our hometown people. Josh Duhamel is a B-list actor. He is an A-plus list actor in North Dakota, as far as we're concerned, right? And I love Josh Duhamel. I'm playing a video game that has Josh Duhamel in it right now. We like the guy. We love it. Carson Wentz, right, is not going to be a Hall of Fame quarterback in the NFL, but we love him in North Dakota because he's one of us, right?
When you and I play Immaculate Grid and you get to play Rick Helling or Darren Erstad, you are so excited.
I am so excited about it. You're excited about it too. We're all excited about it. We love it. North Dakotans. So I think there's a lot of people who were cheering Doug on. I even heard a lot of Democrats who were just like, you know what? I'm really glad we're putting North Dakota on the map. We're out there, right? We're bringing the national media into North Dakota. It's a good thing. He had the goodwill, but he runs the risk of squandering a lot of that. He runs the risk of North Dakotans perceiving this as a go get him, Doug, to, okay, you're embarrassing us now. Because you're not living in the real world. You're living in some bubble where you think you can tell us things like, I skipped the debate, and we're going to believe them. That does not tell me that your campaign is operating in a way that's grounded in reality.
Yeah, and now the flip side of this, as I'm thinking about it, they might be in that room and be like, we're not going to win in 2024, but what can we do now to spend money in these early states that will assist us in 2028, right? Or something like that. Because I think that's probably the path at this point, no matter what, no matter if it's Trump or Biden, there's going to be an open presidential seat in 2028.
I've been saying that for a while.
Yeah. And so what can Burgum do to sort of raise the national profile during this time? And maybe there's something to be said about $10 million spent on TV in New Hampshire and Iowa. What does that pay for in 2028? Or does it give him sort of a bolt at the beginning?
It's the name recognition thing again.
Yeah. So maybe that's the calculus. So maybe I was being a little bit hard on media consultants, but that's also in my DNA after years and years and years.
But also there again, there's a point at which, okay, you raised your name recognition, but also you turn into a punchline.
Right.
Like you gotta rein back before you stay around too long.
Well, and he didn't make the debate stage, right? And I didn't watch the debate on Wednesday. I forgot it was happening, which is not a good sign for if people like me aren't paying attention. But the more I thought about it, it reminds me of March, and you have the college basketball tournament, and that's announced, and they play for the national championship. I don't know if people know this, but then there's an NIT tournament. So after the first 68 teams are chosen, then it's another 32 teams that play in the NIT tournament. It feels like Donald Trump has already won the college basketball championship, and everybody else is playing in the NIT for this sort of this trophy for participation in the presidential race. I mean, it just doesn't seem like it matters. And again, it's a battle to see who's going to be down by 40 points to Donald Trump in these early states.
No, something has to pierce the mystique of Donald Trump. And I don't know what it is. And I'm not even saying it can happen at this point. But something's got to happen if in the next month or so, if we want to see another Republican but Donald Trump be the nominee. And, I hope it happens. It's a terrible mistake. It astounds me that people know everything that they know about Donald Trump and they're sticking with him. That they know even you look at the laundry list of people who he has hired for his administration. These are people that he chose. These are people that he hired, that he appointed, who have come around and said, this guy is a monster. This guy, he can't be depended on. He's not competent. He should not hold this office. There's a big list of people like that. John Bolton, right? His former chief of staff, Kelly. You go down the laundry list. Generals, Republicans. It's how you can look at that and say, I'm sticking with Trump. I don't know. That's a whole other. It seems like that's sometimes the only thing we ever talk about.
The other thing that can see, and I'm sort of sitting here racking my brain about what could happen to sort of make this competitive on the Republican side. So we're 2 months from Iowa, right? It's conveying wisdom that Trump's going to win Iowa by 40 points or whatever. If Haley or DeSantis or somebody beats him in Iowa, I think that could be a bit of a course correct where people are like, whoa, that turns out this thing is competitive. And Iowa's been known to sort of
be weird, hard to poll.
Yeah, well, hard to poll, and also they don't like when people around the country tell them who they should vote for. And I saw something where there was somebody doing a focus group and asked, does Kim Reynolds' endorsement matter? And everybody said it did. So she's the governor of Iowa. Obviously, that's a big deal.
She endorsed Ron DeSantis. And by the way, specifically repudiated endorsing Donald Trump, according to the way she characterizes it. And I don't have any reason to doubt it. Donald Trump asked her to endorse him, and she said no. And she stayed out of it. And he was upset that she was even going to stay neutral, and now she's endorsed. And you think about how much the bet that she's placing. I think that's very, very interesting, because the amount of trouble that she bought herself by turning on Trump like that, in terms of people maybe running primaries against her. I don't know what her future aspirations are. I do know that the senior senator from Iowa is 90 years old. And maybe not everybody wants to be a United States senator, but if she did, doing this to Trump just made that path a lot rockier.
But kudos, right? We've been calling on Republicans to do this.
It's the right thing. I'm just saying, by placing that bet, it's almost like she. I don't know what you want to call it, like an act of civic hygiene. It's like she put the right thing. And at this point, I'm defining the right thing very broadly as literally anybody but Donald Trump, who is a dangerous demagogue and an existential threat to our republic. She put doing the right thing above her personal ambitions. It would have been a lot easier to just stay neutral. It would have been maybe even easier than that to just do a very kind of quiet endorsement of Donald Trump.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I'm sitting here thinking, kudos to Kim Reynolds for endorsing this person who's terrible on every single thing I care about.
Right. Yeah. Basically endorsing the, like, I'm Donald Trump, except I don't have like multiple porn stars that I've paid off. Like, that's,
yeah.
Listen, everybody's grading on a curve these days. Okay.
It's an interesting bar we're living under here.
Yeah. Do you think, I think by the time people listen to this podcast, I will have a column out kind of about the national, the Moms for Liberties losing across the country. And I referenced, obviously what happened in Williston earlier this year. I do think I find some hope in the fact that it doesn't seem like a lot of people who aren't Trump can replicate sort of success with Trumpian politics. Like, it's you could point to some, like Marjorie Taylor Greene. There's some people that have ridden his coattails, don't get me wrong. But none of whom seem to have the staying power or the enduring popularity that Trump does. I find some hope in that.
You referenced Williston, where they recalled some school board members and then they lost. Up in Devil's Lake this last June, there was 2 school board seats up, and one of them was a candidate who was endorsed by Rick Becker and the Sons of Liberty. Those candidates lost to sort of more normal, nonpartisan, just people who care about their community sort of thing. I think it's a good point that people are pushing back in those nonpartisan settings, right? I think the real question becomes when the Sons of Liberty candidates, when the Bastiat Caucus candidates are running as Republicans, right? We know that they're better at district conventions than the traditional Republicans are. Can they be beat when they've got the little R behind their name in a state like North Dakota? That's where I start to sort of question. And that's where, again, going back to Kim Reynolds, are there North Dakota Republicans, not named Rob Port, who are going to point this out and say, this is not the kind of person that we want in the legislature, right? I think that's what it's really going to come down to. Winning these nonpartisan races. Heck, I'd look back at the Fargo school board race in 2022, where they had a slate of candidates that was sort of endorsed by the Sons of Liberty, Bastiat sort of thing, and they all lost too. So in these nonpartisan races, I think looking at North Dakota, and I think we saw around the country, there's a real history of these kind of folks not winning. In some places, other places, they're taking over school boards and banning all the books and running the. But
even those, those are, to me, because I look at it as a fever. Like, these things are up and down, right? And it's, I feel like we've been going through like a moral panic, especially if we're talking about like the school boards, a moral panic over these books and everything else, and those things fade. They fade in the same way that, once upon a time people were upset that people were listening to the Beatles, right? And now who on earth finds the Beatles to be, subversive? Elvis Presley was once upon a time, and now like people's grandmas love Elvis Presley. So, this idea, these things pass and they don't age well. And I think there's going to be a lot of people who are sort of all on for these book bans who maybe aren't going to want to talk very loudly about it, 5 or 6 years hence. So I think there's a fever that can pass. And I guess that gives me hope that the Trump fever can pass. It gives me hope that so much of what's driving Trumpism is Trump himself.
Right. It's personality driven more than ideological.
Right. And so I'm really hoping that, that's an indication that we can wake up and we can get back to the better days where, we're still going to be at loggerheads with each other over issues like, Social Security reform or these really important issues that we should be talking about.
Public employee pensions, for example.
Exactly. Where we can have good debates. And it is, I do think there's going to be a generation of Americans who kind of formed a coalition against Trumpism, even though they had very different views on actual policy issues. I wonder if a side effect's going to be kind of a new spirit of bipartisanship almost, where I don't know, bipartisan, just kind of good feelings where it's like, maybe Republicans who want to do something about the deficits in Social Security, maybe they don't really hate old people. Maybe they just have different ideas about what that program should be.
Maybe they don't want to throw grandma off the side of a cliff in a wheelchair.
Right. Maybe Paul Ryan was not some evil, terrible person, right? Maybe Mitt Romney and his binders full of women was not actually the terrible misogynist that he was painted as being.
I was driving the other day and I was listening to CNN something, like they do like documentaries on the radio. And it was about the Obama 2008 race. And it was John McCain telling the little old lady, nope, he's not a Muslim. He's a good man. We just have some differences of opinions. And thinking about how much I thought John McCain was bad,
right?
As a Democrat, as a partisan. And then Barack Obama ran against Mitt Romney in 2012. Barack Obama ran against John McCain and Mitt Romney. Oh my God, would I long for those days where they're literally having conversations about policy and not just craziness. We didn't have to worry about the peaceful transfer of power, right? I mean, honestly, whoever wins the next election, we're going to have to worry about what happens in Washington in January of 2025. We're going to have to worry.
The Speaker of the House has a well-established record of questioning the 2020 election. So when it comes time for the House of Representatives to certify the 2024 election, and if it didn't go Trump's way, I'm worried about that. And I'm worried, frankly, about some of the more extreme elements of the Democratic Party.
Listen, I think that's a fair statement. It's not, this is not.
Look at what's been happening in the House with like censure palooza lately. This is such a waste of our time.
But I also think that you're going to have people on the left who are so terrified of Donald Trump being elected again that they might suggest doing things as for the good of the country. I suppose much like the January 6th protesters were trying to do.
See, and that's scary. Like
it is scary
because when you start saying, well, we can set aside the Constitution because we're justified in doing it. The idiots you saw marching through Nancy Pelosi's office on January 6th, they thought they had God and the Constitution on their side too.
Right. Or, for example, if there's people who don't like the results of an Ohio abortion vote, and they're saying we should overturn it because, I only like the voice of the people when they agree with me, like Representative Pritchard did earlier this week. I mean, it's really a scary, we like the voice of the people as long as they agree with us 100% of the time.
By the way,
that's not the country we live in, Rob.
Chad, it was ironic when I was reading State Representative Brandon Pritchard's, who is no stranger to this audience, when I was reading his tweet, he was talking about the Ohio election where they affirmed abortion rights, which, by the way, I don't know, looking at that as a pro-life person, there were a lot of, I think it upheld something you and I have talked about, which is that most people are kind of somewhere in the middle on abortion. They don't want it completely banned. They don't want it 100% completely legal either. They want some form of restriction. That constitutional measure in Ohio allows for that. There could still be abortion restrictions in Ohio. Some level of access has to be illegal. And there's going to be more debates and I'm sure litigation over that in the years to come.
For how long did we want to overturn Roe v. Wade so the states could make the decision?
Exactly. That frustrates me as a conservative. I mean, to me, even regardless of how you felt about abortion, you could make a federalist argument against Roe v. Wade. There is no right to an abortion in the national constitution. It is a states' rights issue. That was the correct decision. And so, but that also means you have to respect when California or Ohio or anywhere other state does something you don't like on abortion, you have to accept. That's what it is. I'm glad it's back in the states. I'm glad we're having these debates at the state level, even though they may not always go the way I think they should. But a lot of people are getting tied up in that abortion narrative. I think a lot of those measures that have passed at the state level are a lot more nuanced than the way some people at the national level are talking about them. Big surprise.
You're saying that public policy is often nuanced. It's not just black and white.
Yes, I am.
Up and down.
Yes, I am.
But hey, you did find a place where you and Brandon agree. Direct democracy sucks.
Oh, yeah.
You guys both agree on that.
Okay, well, that was the point I wanted to make because, last cycle, he was on the sponsoring committee for a ballot measure, the term limits ballot measure. So I guess direct democracy is okay as long as it's in pursuit of something he likes.
Yeah, again, at least you're consistent with not trusting the voters of North Dakota, right?
Right. I am consistent and by the way, I align with people like Alexander Hamilton and James Madison in not liking direct democracy. I don't think it's a wise thing. Anyway, that's a whole other issue. But I think, even going back, if we looked at, I really think that, respect for institutions and respect for outcomes, even when you don't like them, is so important, which is why, I had some sharp words for the superintendent of Fargo Public Schools, Rupak Gandhi, when he came out. And in fact, so much so that when during the special session, when State Representative Bill Twite stood up and he wanted to put some teeth in the law, I should set all this up for people. During the regular session, the legislature passed a law. It basically was the pronoun bill. It banned schools from accommodating trans students. You can't use their preferred pronouns. You can't do things to make them feel more comfortable in school. And so after it passed, and it was signed into law by Governor Burgum, the superintendent of Fargo Public Schools, Rupak Gandhi, said to a school board, we're not going to enforce the law. We're going to ignore the law. I didn't think that was right. And I wrote, you can't just ignore the law. If you want to challenge the law, then go to the courts, file a challenge, but you can't just say, I'm just going to ignore it. Now, the problem is there was no basically enforcement mechanism in that law. And so during the special session, Representative Twite, and it got voted down immediately, but he tried to introduce a bill that would have I think it would have allowed the Attorney General's office to initiate investigations, and then people could be fined civilly for not following the law. But he quoted me on that, where I was saying, you can't just ignore the law, and I believe in that. And I think we've gotten so used to, if it's protesters, for instance, I look at the Dakota Access Pipeline protests, which, however you feel about the pipeline, the protesters were violent. And they trespassed on property. They destroyed property. They came into Bismarck at one point. They set fire, or into Mandan, I think it was, and they set fire to a truck and then put it across railroad tracks. I mean, stuff like that shouldn't be defended, but there was a lot of people defending them because they agreed with the goal of the pipeline protesters, or the Black Lives Matter protests, where you could say, I believe that we have a problem with police in this country treating people unequally. I think they do it along racial lines. I think an even bigger problem that we don't talk about nearly enough is they do it along economic lines. I think those are real problems that we have to talk to. I understand the anger, but that doesn't justify you hurting other people, particularly innocent bystanders. And so, I mean, it worried me when the news media, comes out and you have all these public health experts and they're saying, well, Black Lives Matter protests during the pandemic are okay, but Sturgis is a super spreader event and they're literally murdering people. That happened. We have a lot of those problems in our society right now, where we say, well, it's okay to break the law. It's okay to ignore the election outcome. It's okay to ignore the legislature as long as you're doing it for the right reasons. That is a dangerous path to walk.
Yeah, I think hypocrisy is alive and well, right? I mean, there's no doubt, and we've talked a lot about that over the last year or so on this podcast about how, I'm guilty of it. There's times where, I'm saying I want state rights on some things and local control on some things, depending on what the best path to sort of reach my policy is, right?
I mean, I'm going to defend you, though, Chad. There are instances when you're talking about what's the proper role of the federal government, what's the proper role of the state government.
Right.
You can have nuanced positions on things like that without being a hypocrite.
Yeah, but it is often if somebody I like does something, then it's okay. If somebody I don't like, it's the worst thing in the world. And I think that's alive and well. And I don't know what to do about it at this point, because I think it really is the biggest driver of, the yeah, but society.
Yeah.
I don't like the Republican, the Republicans did this. Yeah, but remember Hillary's emails.
Yeah.
Yeah, but remember when Nancy Pelosi did that.
Right. Or like what we've talked about, all the stuff about Hunter Biden and the Biden family, and some of what I will admit are some troubling connections that I think are worthy of inquiry and worthy of scrutiny. I don't understand how Republicans can be, get their skirts over their heads about that. But Donald Trump's under 91 criminal indictments, and you're aiming to reelect him.
Not to mention his kids did okay while Donald Trump was president, working in the White House, and Jared Kushner did okay when he came out of the White House.
Son-in-law, yeah. I mean, I if you're going to be worried about Hunter Biden, and I'm not saying you shouldn't be.
I'm not saying you shouldn't be either.
Right, but then you have...
If he broke the law, he should pay.
But then you have to be worried about Ivanka and Jared Kushner and Don Jr. and Eric Trump. Like, you have to be worried about that too. Like, you don't get to pick and choose when you have ethics, which is, again, it's the what about us society. You know, but what about this? Well, what about it?
Yeah. Well, or, you know, on the way to my kid's school, I drive by a house who has this big flag that says the F word Biden. And then I go up and it's like a block from my kid's school.
Right.
I almost guarantee the people who live in that house are also for book banning in schools because there's things that they don't like. But they see no problem in the F word about the president of the United States where kids are walking by every day.
I agree. Like, I support their First Amendment right to have what I consider to be a flag that is in very poor taste. However, I feel, I mean, I don't like Joe Biden either, but I also have some personal dignity where I'm not going to fly a profanity.
Be an adult. Be an adult. We don't use that language in front of kids.
Right. I mean, you want to ask me how I feel about Joe Biden? I mean, first of all, I'm not going to use profanity about it. I don't think he's a very good president. He supports a lot of policies that I don't support, that I think are bad for our country. But I also don't think he's evil. I just think he's wrong. And I can tell you that. Like, I can cite you policy and examples of why I feel that way. And I don't have to resort to the F word to do it. But I also think that if I want to, like, I support, you want to fly that flag, you want to wear that t-shirt, have that bumper sticker, go ahead. I also think that my kids should be able to read a book that acknowledges that gay people exist. So, I mean.
Absolutely. All of it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I think we've covered just about everything. We're heading into Veterans Day weekend. So, by the way, if all the veterans out there, thank you for your service. My father is a veteran. I haven't really talked about this. I guess I don't much. I know people can tell I don't like social media very much. So mostly I just post links to my articles there. Sometimes you'll get a funny picture of my kids or something. But my father's actually been in the hospital for a long time, and we just finally got him back home. He's a Vietnam combat veteran. He won the Silver Star in Vietnam for rescuing a platoon. There was they'd gotten surrounded by the enemy. My father organized he was a long-range reconnaissance platoon, so they were kind of out in the jungle on their own. They heard the call. They went and they pierced the enemy lines. So they went. If you can imagine, like they're surrounded by the enemy. My father and his team go running through them to reinforce the people in the middle. And then they called in a helicopter. The helicopter fell on his back. The man won a Silver Star, 4 Bronze Stars, 3 Purple Hearts, and an Air Medal. He didn't have to win a single one of those to be my hero. But I'm so glad he'd have it back.
Rob, I don't know if you know this, but my father was a Vietnam vet as well, my late father.
That's wonderful. Let's hear about it.
It's very interesting. So my dad died when he was 51. I was probably 20 years old. And it's the one thing, my dad was a politician. He talked to everybody. He knew everybody. He wouldn't talk about that. Yeah. Like, he was very much, and I always found it sort of a strange bond when he met fellow Vietnam vets, no matter if it was in a political setting or whatever. There was this instant bond that was undescribable. Like, it's like they went through something that people couldn't understand. And so, you know, my brother, right before my dad died, was doing a paper for college and recorded a video of my dad talking about his service and what he did. And again, my dad was a politician, a gregarious, meet everybody. He was stones, like very little facial expression, and just answering the questions, because still 30 years later, he was uncomfortable with sort of what happened.
About 15 years ago, I found my father's medals in a shoebox, basically. I mean, just kind of cast aside. And so for his birthday that year, I took and I had them all mounted in a shadow box. And I have a picture of him of 21-year-old Sergeant Raleigh Port, who just got his Silver Star pinned on him by George S. Patton IV.
Wow.
As a member of the 11th Armored Cav. And I got it all lined up for him. I had his unit commendations and the Black Horse Battalion or division. I'm forgetting now. And the cavalry things and all that stuff. I had it all put in a shadow box. I gave it to him for his birthday, and he was grateful for it. But about a year later, he gave it back to me. It just didn't really. I don't know. Like, he's never. Exactly to your point, like, he's never wanted to talk about it a lot. And I think sometimes we spend so much time saying, thank the troops. It's become a cliche, and I understand because we do it a lot. But sometimes cliches are good. And I think that's one that's good. I like that one. So if you're listening to this and you're a veteran, this is not a cliche. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Happy Veterans Day.
We'll put a pin in it there. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.